get us going. So welcome to our webinar on leadership development. This is a part of series that we started a while back around technical enablement. And so I'll talk about that, but basically under technical enablement, we put a number of various practices or programs, everything from onboarding to leadership development to technical documentation, collaborative peer learning, mentorship, coaching, office hours, etc. So this is part of that series. So it's the first time we're actually running the webinar on leadership development. So bear with us as we keep going through this. Feedback is always welcome. And keep you can keep your video on or off. Just keep your sound off because we expect a few people. So just want to avoid any background noise. And feel free to ask questions in the chat as we keep on going. So as I present, I'll be also looking at the chat window. So at any point, feel free to use that as a quote unquote soundtrack on the side. So with that, let's get going. So a little bit of a backstory, why I'm here and why am I telling you about this. So in my previous life, I used to run a software training company called Maracana. We would basically go to large mostly tech companies such as Intel, Cisco, Qualcomm, Department of Defense, etc. And we would train their engineers and technical folks on cutting edge open source technologies. And then in 2013, Twitter acquired us when it was a much smaller company. And so we went in-house to build Twitter University. And initially the focus was engineers, but very quickly it became apparent that we were also growing leaders. So we also created a leadership program, first for technical folks, then also for people leaders. And a lot of that was inspired by talking to my peers in the industry at the time. And so I would compare notes with LinkedIn, with Google, with a couple other organizations to find out how they were growing their leaders and certain patterns starting emerging. So that's why I'm super passionate about this topic of leadership development, especially for technical folks. I also wanted to mention that a lot of insights that we have come from a community, and I'll talk about the community shortly, called Technocon. And a lot of these stories, we actually publish them. So there is a section on Plus website. Tomomi will probably share it, but it's basically called Ideas. And that's where we share stories from companies like yours on things, how they approach all things tech enablement, which leadership development is a part of. So that's just the resource I wanted to mention. Briefly, the community, Technocon, we started back in 2018, and it used to be an annual conference, initially at LinkedIn and then at Twitter. And it's basically for people in learning and development roles at companies that are tech-enabled. So mostly technology, innovative, progressive companies of Silicon Valley and beyond. And so this is who's who on that list, taken back in 2019 at Twitter, this particular photo. So a lot of insights that we share come from there. And so some of these links are shared in the chat by Tomomi. Tomomi is, you might have met her before. She organizes all these events and the community as well. So she spearheads all this. So with that, I mentioned tech enablement as a larger umbrella under which there are a number of initiatives, and you may or may not own some of them. So technical onboarding is an obvious one, general knowledge sharing, peer learning, collaborative learning, all the ad hoc one-on-ones like mentorship, coaching, office hours, documentation, metrics, and insights. And so we've done a series of these webinars on most of these topics. So certainly on onboarding, collaborative learning just last month. What's coming up is mentorship and tech docs in November, December. We'll share those dates later. Today, we're talking about the leadership development. So with that, let's talk about what makes leadership development interesting and different than some other type of learning and development that a company like yours may deal with. Well, for one, I'll try to make a case that leadership development is really transformational in nature. And the reason for that is that it's not just about what you don't know, right? So for example, if I'm a technical person, or I may know that I don't know a certain framework or certain language, and there are ways I can mitigate that. I can go and find a course and learn about that. I can read a book or join an online experience or something like that. The challenge with leadership development is that it's usually about things that I don't even know that I don't know. So in other words, they're often blind spots for us. And in other words, it's not obvious what even if there was a resource, which one to pull out and how to learn about that, right? So the nature of it is that it requires much more context. It's not just throwing a piece of content over the fence that is required. So that's what makes this unique. I love this story that when I started working on the leadership development at Twitter, there was a person from Google that pointed me out to this story. It's called Flatlanders, and some of you may or may not know, but it's a novel from, I want to say, 50s. And it basically talks about this world that's two-dimensional. And you have people, and they are represented as either sticks or triangles or sometimes circles. But essentially, everyone in the world in this flatland world is essentially represented as a two-dimensional figure, or more specifically line or circle or a triangle. Every once in a while, somebody notices that a circle may start as a dot, becomes bigger, 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 and then becomes smaller, smaller, smaller. And then that person figures out that there's actually a third dimension, that the world is not a two-dimensional. And so once you see that, you essentially, you saw a third dimension, you saw something that was totally a blind spot, impossible to notice by anyone else before. So my argument here is that leadership development is about those blind spots. It's about opening up that third dimension, that viewpoint that is not possible in sometimes just throwing content over the fence, and it really requires a much deeper experiential, immersive sort of experience going through this. So that's just something that resonated with me, at least romantically, back when I was doing this, creating a program. So another way to kind of think about why we call it development versus learning is that it's not about filling the cup, so to speak. So it's not just like, hey, I don't know something, I'm going to pour more knowledge into your head and now you know something, but it's really about expanding the capacity, like what we're capable of as leaders. So it's a next level thinking that's required, rather than just cramming more of the same. So another way to kind of think about it is, on one side of the spectrum, you have micro learning, right? Like, I don't know X, I'm going to learn X, and now I know X. And that's packing more stuff into the existing cup. And then on the other side of the spectrum that we're trying to talk about today is really about expanding beyond just what's possible in general. So that's why leadership development is vertical as opposed to just horizontal in terms of how that works. So with that, let's talk about what's important. How do you create such experiences? You don't need to read the text. This is, I'll be following up with you individually afterwards and sending you this as a leave behind. A couple of points I wanted to make is that to have a powerful program, blended approach tends to be the most powerful. So basically creating a blended learning experiences. The next one is automating some of those experiences so that people can move through that in a lockstep and not have to worry about missing out or staying current. And then ultimately having a way to close the loop. So having metrics and insights that inspire action and help you do things better as you keep on going. So those are some aspects that we're going to be talking about. So that's roughly our flight plan to go through next couple of slides. And by the way, as we go through the slides, I'm also going to flip to some examples to actually show you what this might look like in a sort of operationalized case. So just kind of bear with me as I do that as well. So we're going to talk about blended learning as one of the core tenets here. And specifically, what we're going to talk about is how to codify knowledge, provide for a way to practice it, and also provide support when people get stuck. So because just having one without the other is usually not sufficient. So codifying knowledge. So presumably in your company, there's a way you would like to do things, and it's yours and it's uniquely yours, right? Like we hear, for example, we work with Netflix, and Netflix calls that the Netflix way, right? Like they're very much about the culture. And so codifying how they work there is something that is important to them. And yeah, I may be a great leader coming from another organization. However, that doesn't mean that I know the Netflix way, right? So I will need to be sort of indoctrinated in their way of doing things. So certain companies that are strong on culture care about that. And one approach to do that is to codify that in playbooks. So if you kind of think about it, a simplistic way to think about it is you have roles, you have plays, and then you have game plans, and kind of combining all this, you get a set of playbooks, and then it becomes obvious how to do that. So for example, in an organization, I'll actually flip over to what is a demo site, just to kind of illustrate what that might look like, so that we're moving from lines and circles to something that is a little bit more tangible. So I have a number of playbooks here, and we'll see the insights of them later on. But for example, we have a leadership development. So this would be more generic sort of leadership thing. So it's more encompassing and broader in scope. But then we may have something that is much more targeted, like hiring playbook, right? So maybe I am just on, hiring a number of people, and we have a certain way we do top grading or interviewing or whatever we do at our company. And so this would be a playbook specific to that. Or, for example, as a leader or a manager, we use OKRs as a way to plan and align what we were working on. So I need a refresher or knowledge on how to do OKRs. So this will be the playbook on that. So in other words, these could be smaller playbooks on something that's very specific, like how do I do hiring or how do I do planning, right? Or they could be more generic. How do we reason about leadership or managing in general? So this is just an example of like rubber meets the road, what playbooks may look like as a way to kind of codify that. So that's high level, just kind of codifying knowledge inside of individual plays, and then bottling that up into a playbook. And again, we'll unpack that and look more inside of that. Now, we started this section talking about blended learning. And when we talk about blended learning, we're basically saying it's not just doing one modality, but it's really combining the modalities for when it makes the most sense, right? So for example, basically you have the options of going live on one side of the spectrum. So instructor-led ILT, live training, which could be online or in person, right? On the other side of the spectrum, you could do content-based, right? So you built your e-learning, you bottle it up, looks great, and you just kind of deploy that using your LMS or whatever, right? So those are two sides of the spectrum. And what we're seeing, at least in the community of tech L&D people, as well as just our customers, it's usually a blended approach that works best. And even in the world of work from home and post-pandemic, we're seeing companies did not just move from in-person to online, but they found some balance in between. And they're balancing basically that cultural immersion, right, with things that are matter of fact and people can just learn on their own. So live learning tends to be something that is very powerful when you require context, right? So it's that like high fidelity. I'm going to need to communicate a lot of context back and forth. And it's immersive. I get to ask questions. We get to practice it, embody it, etc. So that's what live learning is great for. And it's also relatively easy to stand up. Often we can just ask the right internal expert to say, to run a workshop. They already know what they know, and they just essentially need to whiteboard it. So usually having an outline, a bullet point outline is sufficient to get going. So it's relatively inexpensive to create, and anyone can do it. You don't require special tools. On the flip side, there's an argument that it's not as scalable. right? And what the argument we're making is that for certain things, it's not about scalability, but it's really about that quality knowledge, because the most expensive part here are all these people that are participating in the experience. So you want to make sure that new leaders have the best experience, and that's the optimization that we argue for, as opposed to optimizing for ease of delivery, right? Because then you can deliver but don't have the impact that you want. Self-paced content is the other side of the equation. So traditionally, a lot of learning and development programs are built as e-learning content. So basically, welcome to our company. You're a new manager. Here, watch this. Flip through the slides, answer some quiz questions, and off you go. And that is okay for nuggets of knowledge, things that are micro in nature, things that are matter of fact. Like you didn't know X, you need to know X. So self-paced content is great for that. It's also great for things that are stable, right? So if it doesn't change, if it's like, this is how we do performance reviews, for example, it's stable, we've been doing it for a long time. So bottling that into e-learning works. Another thing that we are seeing across our customer base is that knowledge is already there, but it's about curating it, right? So pretty much every company doesn't suffer from not having documentation. It actually suffers from having too much, right? So the wiki is, hundreds of thousands of pages, for example, or that Google Doc that's very important, nobody can discover it, right? So how do you solve for that curation of the right documents, right videos in the places that people already use it? So as opposed to requiring specialty tools, how do you basically provide for ease of sharing and ease of discoverability? It's something that we see is important for immersive experiences. And not to forget, just throwing content at people, just learning doesn't mean that they embody it, right? So one of the things, especially with leadership development, is that, like I said, it's very immersive in nature. So one of the most important things is actually that getting on the mat and practicing with your cohort. So a couple of things that I'm stressing here is that it's live, meaning that you are actually getting together with other humans, and it's a small group of people, cohort, that is moving lockstep through this experience. That's where we usually see the best experiences. I mentioned when we developed leadership development at Twitter, I compared notes with a number of peers like LinkedIn and Google, and they argued, this is pre-pandemic, right? So they argued to even not do it in the office, but actually go offsite. So we ended up doing it at the Zen Center in Marin County in California, and it would basically be a sleepover. There was a lot of practice. There was a lot of being in the nature. Very, very different experience than actually being in front of a screen, or even in a conference room in the building, in the headquarters. So so that time to practice is important, and ideally with other humans. So great. So I might have gotten all the knowledge that is codified in playbooks. I might have practiced it. So we went offsite and we did some simulations and otherwise practiced it. And now I'm managing people, I'm leading a team, I'm doing things like rubber meets the road. Well, what happens when I get stuck, right? Because ultimately the world is messy and we did not account for everything. So there's going to be things that show up from the left field. How do we deal with that? And so a couple of things that we lean on are things like mentorship, coaching, office hours, Slack, etc. So these are ad hoc channels, but what's important is that they are provided there, so that they do exist, and there's a way that I can knock at the door and know that it's okay for me to knock the door. That's the big thing, as opposed to me hunting and asking somebody and then having second thoughts and creating that friction. So the more that it's okay, the easier it is to get unstuck. And this is the important thing, because ultimately people run fast and do right things as they know that there are guardrails that support them on that road. So I'm going to just flip over really quickly. I talked a lot about what this might look like. I'll click on an example. So like leadership development, for example, just to kind of show you how that could be bottled up as an instance. So we have leadership development. There's a little bit of what it is, a blurb. And as you can see, there's a number of steps, 13 to be precise. And it starts with a workshop, a live session, another live session, followed by a video, followed by another live session, followed by a video or some kind of article, followed by another article, and so on. So this is my point here is that we're combining different modalities in this longer arc of experience that is to be a leader in our company, right? A couple of other things that I wanted to point out is that we also have, I mentioned office hours. So if I get stuck, so first of all, I know who the other people are that are participating in this experience. I also know who I can ask for help, or I can click on the actual office hours to see what that looks like, and I'll open it up in a different window just so you can kind of see that. So in this case, for coaching, there's a set of there's a place where I can go to ask for help. And I saw a couple of people from Shopify join this call. Shopify actually inspired this. They had something called Coach's Corner, which has been there for a while, that is available to all people at Shopify, as well as there's this program for managers. And so that's a way to kind of provide for that support to get unblocked when you're blocked once you're done with your training and actually practicing it. So if another way to kind of view this is if I click on here, you can kind of see I have a workshop. So there's a workshop, Trusted Leader. My cohort, 7 people are enrolled online for this. So that would be the part 1. And there's part 2 is another workshop. And then there might be a video. In this case, it's Simon Sinek on starting with a why. And then we're getting into OKRs. So this is now another workshop, followed by another video, followed by a deck. And the reason why I wanted to point this out is that I mentioned that content may be everywhere in the company, right? So it could be that it's just Google Slides. And what we want to provide is for curation, for a way to kind of write Google Doc out of thousands that you may have into this context. So as a new leader, I'm like, this is the authoritative, how we set objectives, how we measure key results, what it means to be green, yellow, red, etc. So there's a way to bring that into a flow to make it easy for me to follow this through. And this, you can do this with Google Docs, you can do this with Confluence, Wiki, etc., other cloud-based documents, and bring them into a story like this, so that it's in one ongoing experience. And of course, Slack is another way. You can also attach Slack channels so that each cohort and in each leadership course would have its own Slack channel to discuss things in real life as well. So I mentioned, I keep talking about cohorts quite a bit, and that's something that is we're seeing very important. So in other words, for regular training, right? So for example, if I have a course on, say, Java or something like that, it's almost transactional, right? Like I don't really care who signs up, like it's there, people can just jump in, take it, leave, and so on. So it's a very atomic in nature, right? Like you do something and you're done with that. And we certainly have examples of that. Like, for example, this could be random events, right? So for example, how to run interviews, maybe just a session and anyone can sign up. There's no sense of cohort or a longer arc, right? But things that are experiential in nature and that are a longer arc of experience, such as onboarding or leadership development, they make sense to have a cohort of people. And essentially what happens, what we've observed is that people that chase mastery together form a community, which ultimately impacts culture. So basically, the more we enable this, the stronger bonds in the culture internally are for as the experience. And so that's what we want to cause. We want to impact culture ultimately. So having a cohort moving in a lockstep is important. We are working on some things that are going to make this even better. So today, just to kind of, if I had, for example, new manager track and I wanted to add a cohort, I can go and add a specific group. So for example, I'm going to add assignees, and I created a group of leaders for cohort summer 2022. And I can specify a due date for them. I'll change it to the end of the month. And I guess I already actually added all of them. So I'll add another group. And if I add this, I now have added 27 people to that experience. So you can kind of see who they are. So that's one way to do that. A couple of things that we are doing in the future is we're going to be able to schedule such experiences. So for example, you will be able to say, here's a class, here's a workshop, and we're going to have a different offerings in Q1, Q2, Q3. We're going to have different offerings for, say, Latin America versus North America, and we're going to have people sign up. One cohort is going to be in one workshop, another cohort is going to be in a different workshop. So that's basically how we see this panning out in the future. So that's a little bit on cohort-based learning. So we talked about operationalizing, right? So for this to be a first-class experience for people, it's about creating a workflow that makes it easy. So one of the observations that we had working, and as I mentioned, at Twitter and other companies, is that employees want to just have it be in the flow of their own work. So they just show up and things work for them. So that also means fewer mistakes, means less busy work of, toil work of scheduling and et cetera. Especially if it's a blended experience, there are a lot of moving parts that we need to take into consideration. This is a diagram we put together for just to kind of illustrate things that may be to-dos for onboarding, and it's very similar for onboarding new managers and leaders. So basically, so you have leadership candidates. There could be some automation as well that basically says, what makes somebody a candidate for an experience, so that you have a dependent, like that the right people are going to be sign up for the right leadership courses. And we talked about codified knowledge, we talked about practice, we talked about support. So the blue is what a learner experiences. And then there's also assessments and surveys and data and insights for you as the program organizer to get feedback loop on how things are working and what's working. So a couple of things I wanted to point out on metrics and what matters there, and a couple of things to keep in mind. So data is important for sure, but data by itself is not telling us the right story, right? So the data is important. So first of all, collecting all the data is important. Then having a way to report on that data is just as important, because we are looking for insights, right? We're looking for things that are kind of interesting to observe. And one of the things that we realize is that what we're seeing is that in the industry, at least, is that in previous decade, data was all over the place, right? So you had one system that was used for onboarding. You had another system for surveys, like SurveyMonkey, for example, or something similar. You had a third system that was your LMS. You had a fourth system that was your LXP. So it was basically all over the place. And by having everything all over the place, it was really hard to get to those reports and insights. Like, it required some special, building pipelines and connecting things to actually get anything. And very few organizations have those resources. So having the data be combined in one place, integrated, would be a better way to kind of describe it. Having the data integrated makes it much easier to get those reports and to get those insights. And then you can basically start seeing things that are, again, not blind sites are not obvious before. Also, what we are seeing is that involving managers is something that more and more organizations care about. And the good news is managers also want to be quite involved in their in the development of their own people. So managers want to grow leaders as well. And so I'll just kind of show you how that might look like. So we may have a profile of a person that is a manager or a direct report. I can easily see what they're up to. So do they have, learnings or things that they're focused on? Like in this longer arcs of development, where are they on that spectrum? And then what is the impact that they have? So, overall impact for them if they're presenting or if they're learning, what do they have upcoming? What are people saying about that? What is the impact as mentors, as holders of office hours, as creators of content, et cetera, et cetera. So insights like this help then have conversations around how to support individuals, because now a manager has a dashboard for what to do. So that's one thing that we're seeing is very interesting. And then ultimately, especially in this down economy, learning and development more and more needs to sell up. So it's about not just being nice to have a leadership program, but what's the impact of that leadership program ultimately to the business as a way to justify its existence, right? So a couple of ways to think about that is, at least what I've done in the past, is I looked at a couple of axes. One is volume. So in other words, butts in seats, or clicks on the e-learning content. So are people engaging with what you created, right? Because ultimately, presumption is that in an organization, I want to do my best work, and this is just a resource for me to get to the next level. So if I'm choosing that resource, and is essentially I'm voting with my feet or my time that this is something that is valuable to me. So volume is one aspect that we always observed, and it was easy to kind of explain up the chain to sell up. The other one is quality, right? So for example, maybe volume is high, but the content is really low quality, and just people are sort of forced to take it because we're the only option in town, right? And so that's not fun. So quality is just as important. And we've had in technical community, we've had a number of conversations about what it means and how do you measure it. And there's no silver bullet, but there are some best practices. And one of them is, using the Kirkpatrick's 4 levels of measuring learning. And essentially learning level 1 is, did they like it? So it's like the smiley sheets after the class, for example, or after completing a course online. So that's easy, but it only tells a fraction of the story. Did they learn it? In other words, did they embody the new leadership methodology is also important. But most important is level 3 and 4, right? So in other words, I might have gone through this leadership training. Am I using it in my work, right? Am I leading a team or leading an initiative, right? Maybe I don't have a direct report, but I'm making an impact as leading an initiative. And what's the impact of me doing that to the organization? Level 3 and 4 are hard to sort of get a numeric feedback on, but what seems to work is asking the right questions and then asking them with a time delay, right? So for example, what we've done is we would ask about behavior from the participant 30 days out. So, hey, you took such and such program, how's that working for you in your day-to-day? So that's level 3. And level 4 is we would ask their managers. So this is back to involving managers, and we would ask, hey, what's the impact of that person taking that leadership course on your team that you observe, or the org in general. And ultimately, if you kind of take these 2 metrics, quality and volume, and multiply it, you essentially get the impact. So if a lot of people are choosing what you have and they're highly rating it as making a difference for them and their people, so your impact as a head of the learning and development or program owner, leadership program owner, is easier to justify. So that's kind of how we've done it, and that's just one way to kind of think about that. So that's that in a nutshell. I showed you some of this, how that may look like. So again, in measuring impact, it could look like a number of charts like this. It's very helpful if this is all integrated. If, for example, all the surveys are a part of right in the course. So for example, if I have a trusted leader and I want to know how well it went, what I can do is I can attach those surveys right into the course itself. So I can basically say, let's do a post-event survey, and let's do it 30 days, 30 days after the event. And then we can also add another survey that's going to be maybe much later. And so maybe it's going to be 90 days after the event. And so that way we can collect the data right where the data is at. And then when we want to do analysis, we can ask ourselves for insights. Well, how's trusted leader doing, globally? Or how is it working on East Coast? Or how is it working for summer 2022 cohort, et cetera, et cetera. So that's kind of that in a nutshell, how that data integration may make sense. So with that, any other questions, comments, or concerns? Anything that I can show what that would look like, or any other questions? We have a couple more minutes left. Feel free to use chat, or if you want to speak up, just go for that as well. Either approach. Questions, comments. I will be following up with all of you, and I'll send this deck so that you also have what we talked about, and you can of course kick the tires and do the demo as well. There are some case studies as well, how other people have done this. So I'll be following up with that. Yeah, any other questions or comments? Or just general feedback? And again, feel free to use the chat.
Hi, Marco. Laura here. Thank you. As always, like tons of great content and information. I'm excited for the examples. I wonder if, and this is maybe if it's okay to open the question out to others, if you've done coaching programs at your firm, and if you've, to the extent that you've used the learning management system or some other mechanism to track the engagement and how that's gone.
Yeah,
I'm asking because I think it's cool, and I like the idea of putting it in there. But my firm, our instinct has been to resist it for various reasons. So I'm curious. Yeah, learn more. Thanks.
Yeah, totally. And by the way, we did publish a couple of stories in ideas under coaching and mentorship, and I can't find them right now. I can follow up with that. But basically, I can speak about two examples that I know firsthand because we worked on them. One is Airbnb, and the other one is Shopify. And we also have Shopify folks online. So if anybody wants to jump in, feel free. So Airbnb launched mentorship program. As a matter of fact, this whole section was inspired by how they reasoned about it. And LinkedIn is now using the same thing. And so their approach was peer-based. So in other words, they would train internal people to become coaches or mentors. They kind of use those terms interchangeably. And then once you're kind of qualified, you get to open up your sessions and make yourself available as a mentor. Airbnb did share the data at Technocon. So in the first year, they got about 10% of the population, so 500 people to raise their hand and say, I want to be a mentor to others. And they had hundreds of sessions booked through that, and they essentially celebrated success from that program. So it was very much bottoms up, peer-based. Anyone in the company was encouraged to get trained as a mentor and open up their sessions. LinkedIn did something similar, but with a twist. They encouraged their leaders to become mentors. So they would basically go to their leadership team would start opening sessions and saying, I, as a mentor, I'm seeking mentees. and here's my sessions available, and please join. And so they use something very, very similar to this. And like, I can pick a person, I can filter for a person based on any criteria, pick a person, see if I like them, see, what their signal is, are they the right fit? And then I can kind of click this and book a session, and this shows up in their calendar automatically. And again, as I mentioned, you can kind of filter.
Did they ever run into issues with like one person being very popular and getting lots of people wanting to book sessions and other people really wanting to be mentors but not getting any traction? So that I'm asking you because the things that we have done, we've kind of set up matched mentors. But I do like this approach of having people talk about what they want to coach in, the mentees sort of self-selecting.
Yeah, so is some of these more popular or not available? So availability is automatic, right? Because if I would open up my own sessions. So for example, if as a mentor, I can say, look, I'm going to dedicate my Friday afternoons, and I'm going to chunk it into half-an-hour blocks, and I'll just open up my Friday afternoons, and whoever signs up, signs up. You can also set criteria. So for example, Tyler is a staff software engineer, and maybe he only wants to mentor software engineers. And so he can basically say, my sessions and my availability is only available to people of such and such, title. So that's one way to do it. And then popularity, what we've noticed is EAs, so executive assistants, they can also set up sessions. So if you do want to do hybrid where you do matching, they could do matching for leaders. So for example, a leader may not have sessions available, but then their EA may go out and do hand picking of the right mentees and do the matching that way. So that's what we've seen. And then I also want to mention Shopify. As I said, this was inspired by them. So they do more of a coaching where it's more of it's less based on a person, but more based on the topic, right? So here's coaching for managers, coaching for technical leads, coaching for data science, whatever. And so basically, it's kind of like office hours, right? Like you're opening up blocks of time. And it's very ad hoc. People can knock at the office door, come in, join, and leave whenever. Or not. So and then if nobody books, the time goes back to you. So the calendar opens, and you can set some criteria as well. So yeah, hopefully that answers that.
Yeah, thank you.
Cool. Any other questions, comments? Cool. Well, as I said, we will be following up, so you'll get a deck and opportunity to reach out if there's anything else. And thanks for joining. And we'll have more sessions that are sort of under the umbrella of tech enablement. So thank you. Great seeing everyone.